There are truths so devastating that they reshape everything you thought you knew about your own life. At 71, I'm finally ready to tell such a truth, not just about what my son did to me, but about why he did it, and how the sins of one generation can poison the next in ways we never imagined possible. My name is Margaret Rose Thompson, and this is the story of how my family became the target of a carefully orchestrated revenge that began years before my son was even born. It's about how hatred can be passed down like an inheritance, and how one man's quest for vengeance destroyed not one family, but two. If you're reading this as a parent, pay attention. The enemy in your child's life might not be a stranger. It might be someone who has been planning their corruption from the very beginning. I was born Margaret Rose Whitman in 1951 in Millbrook, Ohio, a small industrial town built around the steel foundry and Ford assembly plant. My father, Robert, worked double shifts to support our family of 5, me, my 2 younger brothers, Tommy and Mike, and my mother, Helen, who embodied everything good about that generation of women. Family is sacred, Margaret, my father would tell us as we sat on our front porch after dinner. When everything else fails, family protects family. Blood stands by blood no matter what. I believed this absolutely. Family meant safety, unconditional love, people who would die before they hurt you. This belief would prove to be both my greatest strength and my most devastating vulnerability, because I never considered that someone might use it as a weapon against us. At 18, I met David Michael Thompson at a church social. He was 20, recently discharged from the Army, with gentle blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets I wanted to spend my life discovering. David worked as a machinist at Millbrook Steel Foundry, the same plant where my father worked, though, in a different department. "That boy has character," my father said after David's 3rd Sunday dinner with us. "He looks at you like he understands what a privilege it is to earn your love." What I didn't know then, what David never fully told me, was that his job at the foundry involved more than just operating machinery. David had an almost obsessive commitment to safety protocols, a trait that would eventually define his career and unknowingly seal our family's fate. David and I married in June 1970 in the basement of St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. Our honeymoon was a weekend at a cabin on Lake Erie, where David carried a small notebook filled with sketches of the house he wanted to build for us someday. Nothing grand, just 3 bedrooms, a kitchen large enough for family meals, and a front porch where we could grow old together. We rented a tiny apartment above Murphy's hardware store where winter winds whistled through gaps around the windows that we sealed with newspaper and tape. But we were completely, gloriously happy. Every evening, David would return from the foundry carrying something small, a wildflower, a piece of candy, little tokens that said, "I thought of you today," better than expensive gifts ever could. Our daughter, Emily Rose, was born in March 1971, a perfect baby who seemed to embody all our hopes for the future. David wept when he held her for the first time, still wearing his work clothes, oil under his fingernails from rushing to the hospital. "This little girl is going to college, Margaret," he declared with fierce determination. "She'll have choices we never dreamed of. I'll make sure of that." Emily was sunshine from her first day, quick to laugh endlessly, curious reading before she started school. She charmed Mrs. Henderson at the library, who would save special books just for her. "That child has a genuine gift," Mrs. Henderson told me one afternoon. "She asks questions that show real thinking. You should encourage her to aim as high as she wants." David worked overtime relentlessly to save for Emily's education, often coming home exhausted, but never complaining. During this period, I began to notice David occasionally returning from work with a troubled expression, muttering about problems at the foundry or difficult situations with coworkers. One evening in 1974, David came home particularly agitated. He sat at our kitchen table, head in his hands, looking more troubled than I'd ever seen him. "What happened at work today?" I asked, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. "There's a man at the foundry, Arthur Kellner," David said slowly, as if weighing each word. "He's been cutting corners on safety protocols, falsifying inspection reports. Someone's going to get killed if this continues." Have you reported it to the supervisors? David nodded grimly. I've tried talking to Arthur directly first. He has a wife and young son at home. I didn't want to destroy his livelihood, but he just laughs it off, says I'm being an old woman about safety regulations. David, if people could die— I know, he interrupted. I have to report it officially. But Arthur's made it clear he knows it was me who's been documenting his violations. He's made some threats, Margaret. Nothing direct, but he's made it clear he considers me an enemy now. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. What kind of threats? He said that righteous people like me always get what's coming to us eventually, that he has a long memory and knows how to wait for the right moment. David reached across the table to take my hand. I'm probably overthinking it. Arthur's just angry about being caught, but I want you to be aware just in case. 2 weeks later, Arthur Kellner was fired from Millbrook Steel Foundry after David's formal safety report led to an investigation that revealed systematic falsification of inspection documents. The incident that finally triggered Arthur's termination was a near-fatal accident that could have killed 3 workers if David hadn't insisted on a thorough safety review of that particular workstation. David came home the day Arthur was fired, looking like he'd witnessed something terrible. It's done, he told me quietly. Arthur was escorted out this afternoon, but Margaret, the look in his eyes when he saw me. I've never seen such hatred from another human being. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. That man will never forgive me for destroying his career. You didn't destroy anything, I said firmly. You saved lives. If Arthur had continued falsifying those safety reports— I know that logically, but logic doesn't change the fact that I've made a dangerous enemy. Arthur Kellner is the kind of man who holds grudges forever. That was the last time David spoke about Arthur Kellner directly. But for months afterward, I noticed David checking locks twice before bed, glancing over his shoulder when we walked to church, maintaining an alertness that suggested he was waiting for something terrible to happen. Nothing did happen, at least nothing obvious. Arthur Kellner and his family moved away from Millbrook within 6 months, and David gradually relaxed. Eventually, we both forgot about Arthur Kellner entirely. This was our first terrible mistake. In 1982, our son Benjamin David was born after a difficult pregnancy that left me bedridden for 7 months. David shouldered everything during that time, caring for 11-year-old Emily, managing the household, working extra shifts to cover medical expenses, all while maintaining the tenderness and patience that had made me fall in love with him. Benjamin was different from Emily from birth. Where she had been an easy baby, Benjamin was colicky, restless, difficult to comfort. Dr. Patterson explained that some babies have more reactive nervous systems requiring extra patience and consistency. As Benjamin grew, his sensitivity manifested in both beautiful and troubling ways. He was intensely creative, drawing elaborate pictures and building complex worlds in his imagination. But he was also easily overwhelmed by crowds, loud noises, or changes in routine. Where Emily thrived on social interaction, Benjamin preferred solitary activities. The boy needs to toughen up, David would say, watching Benjamin avoid the neighborhood boys' rough games. A man has to learn to stand with other men. I defended Benjamin's gentle nature, but privately I worried about how he would navigate a world that often punished sensitivity in boys. This worry would prove tragically prescient, though not in ways I could have imagined. Emily's teenage years passed smoothly. She excelled academically while working part-time at the library, eventually earning a partial scholarship to Ohio State University. David was overwhelmed with pride. She would be the first in either of our families to attend college. Emily's departure for college in August 1989 left our house feeling empty despite Benjamin's presence. At 7 years old, Benjamin had adored his big sister, following her around the house and seeking her attention in ways he rarely sought ours. With Emily gone, he became even more withdrawn. This was when I first noticed Benjamin making small, cutting comments that seemed beyond normal childhood complaints. Mom, this food is disgusting, he said one evening, pushing away his plate with theatrical revulsion. Don't you know how to cook anything decent? When I asked him to help with household chores, he'd respond with exaggerated sighs. Why can't you do it yourself? It's not like you have a real job. These comments stung, but I told myself this was typical preteen attitude. I had no idea they were the first symptoms of a poison that was about to enter our family's bloodstream. The real change began when Benjamin started 8th grade and began mentioning a new friend named Tommy. I'll never forget the first time I saw Tommy Kellner, a 16-year-old, who had been held back twice with cold eyes and a smile that made my stomach clench with immediate unease. He was tall for his age with prematurely adult features, and the kind of stillness that suggested violence was always an option. When I asked Benjamin where he'd met Tommy, my son was vague. He's just a guy from school. He's cool, he knows about things. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover until years later, was that Tommy Kellner's presence in Benjamin's life was not coincidental. Tommy had been watching our family for months, learning our routines, identifying our vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect opportunity to begin his infiltration. I was folding laundry when I overheard their first significant conversation through Benjamin's partially open bedroom door. "Your dad works at the foundry, right?" Tommy's voice carried an edge I couldn't identify. "Yeah, he's a supervisor now," Benjamin replied with obvious pride. "Supervisor," Tommy repeated, and something in his tone made me stop folding and listen more carefully. "That means he gets to decide who gets fired, right? Gets to ruin people's lives when he feels like it." "My dad doesn't ruin people's lives. He's fair to everyone." Tommy laughed a sound without warmth. "Benjamin, there's a lot about your dad you don't know. A lot about what kind of man he really is behind that nice guy act." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your dad isn't the saint you think he is. He's the kind of guy who destroys families and then goes home to play the perfect father. But we'll talk about that later. First, let me tell you about women." I should have burst into that room immediately. I should have demanded to know what Tommy meant about David destroying families. I should have banned this boy from our house and insisted Benjamin explain exactly how they'd met and why Tommy seemed to know so much about our family. Instead, I continued folding towels, telling myself this was just teenage talk, that Benjamin was too smart to believe whatever poison this boy was selling. This was our second terrible mistake, and it would prove to be far more costly than the first. Within weeks, Tommy Kellner had become a constant presence in Benjamin's life. He would arrive at our house after school, charm me with polite greetings and offers to help with household tasks, then disappear into Benjamin's room for hours of whispered conversations. What I began hearing through those bedroom walls made my blood freeze. "Women are parasites. Benjamin." Tommy's voice carried clearly despite their attempts at secrecy. "They find some sucker to work himself to death while they sit around doing nothing. My mom did the same thing to my dad, nagged him and criticized him until he couldn't take it anymore. But my parents seem happy together," Benjamin said, though I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "That's what they want you to think. But watch them closely. Notice how your mom makes your dad feel guilty for working overtime. How she complains when he's tired, like his exhaustion is somehow an attack on her. That's manipulation, pure and simple." I never thought about it that way. Most men don't until it's too late. Your dad is trapped just like mine was. But the difference is, my dad finally got smart and escaped before she could completely destroy him. This was a lie, of course. What I would later learn was that Arthur Kellner had descended into alcoholism after losing his job, becoming increasingly abusive toward his wife and son, until she finally fled with Tommy, taking nothing but the clothes on their backs. They had lived in poverty for years, moving from one rundown apartment to another, while Arthur drank himself to death in solitary bitterness. But Tommy was rewriting this history, transforming his father's self-destruction into a heroic escape from female manipulation. And Benjamin, isolated and vulnerable after Emily's departure, was beginning to believe it. The conversations grew more disturbing over time. "The problem with women like your mother," Tommy explained during one session I overheard, "is that they're too subtle. They don't nag directly, that would be too obvious. Instead, they create this constant atmosphere of disappointment and guilt. They make men feel like nothing they do is ever enough. How can you tell the difference between caring and manipulating? Benjamin asked. Easy. If a woman really cared about a man, she'd be grateful for everything he provides and wouldn't ask for more. She'd support his decisions instead of questioning them. She'd make his life easier, not harder. But what about my dad's job being dangerous? My mom worries about him getting hurt. Tommy's laugh was bitter. She worries about losing her meal ticket, you mean? If your dad got injured and couldn't work, she'd have to get off her lazy ass and support herself. That's what she's really afraid of. I wanted to storm into that room and confront this manipulation directly. But David counseled patience. It's just teenage rebellion, he assured me. Benjamin's testing boundaries, trying on different ideas to see how they fit. He's too smart to be permanently influenced by this nonsense. We were both wrong. Benjamin wasn't testing ideas, he was being systematically indoctrinated by someone who had spent years planning exactly how to corrupt our son's mind. As Benjamin's friendship with Tommy deepened, I began noticing changes in my son's behavior that went far beyond normal teenage rebellion. He started making comments at dinner that seemed designed to create conflict between David and me. Dad, why do you let Mom control where we spend our vacation money? He asked one evening, despite the fact that David and I had made that decision together after extensive discussion. Benjamin, your mother and I make these decisions as a team, David replied, clearly puzzled by the question. That's what she wants you to think, Benjamin said with a knowing smirk. But who really makes the final choice? David and I exchanged confused glances. Where was this coming from? The comments escalated over the following months. Dad works twice as hard as you do, Mom, but you act like you contribute equally to this family. What? Why should Dad have to ask permission to buy something with money he earned? If Dad died tomorrow, you wouldn't be able to support yourself for a week. Each statement was delivered with a casual cruelty that seemed alien to the boy I'd raised. When I tried to address these comments directly, Benjamin would claim he was just asking questions or trying to understand how families work. But I was beginning to understand that Benjamin wasn't asking innocent questions. He was being coached to plant seeds of discord in our marriage, to make David and me question the foundation of our partnership. Tommy Kellner was playing a longer game than simple teenage corruption. He was methodically attempting to destroy our family from within. During Benjamin's sophomore year, Tommy introduced him to marijuana and alcohol substances that made Benjamin more susceptible to the ideological poison Tommy was feeding him. I began finding drug paraphernalia in Benjamin's room and confronting him about the obvious signs of substance abuse. You're always snooping through my stuff, Benjamin would explode when caught. Why can't you just leave me alone? Benjamin, I'm worried about you. These drugs are dangerous and Tommy has a terrible reputation. Tommy's the only person who tells me the truth. He's not like you. He doesn't pretend to care while he's really just trying to control everything. The fury in his voice was unlike anything I'd heard before. This wasn't typical teenage anger. It was something much darker, more systematic. Tommy had taught Benjamin to interpret every expression of parental concern as evidence of female manipulation and control. During one particularly heated argument, Benjamin said something that made my blood run cold. Tommy says women like you need to learn consequences, that men have been too soft for too long, and that's why society is falling apart. What kind of consequences? I asked, suddenly afraid. Benjamin's eyes held a coldness I'd never seen before. The kind that teaches respect. I tried to discuss this conversation with David, but he was struggling with his own relationship with Benjamin. Our son had begun treating his father with a mixture of pity and contempt that was devastating to witness. Dad, you're a good man, Benjamin said one evening, but you're weak when it comes to women. Tommy's teaching me not to make the same mistakes you did. David's face went white. What mistakes, son? Letting Mom manipulate you into thinking you're partners when she's really just using you. Tommy's dad made the same mistake until he finally got smart and left. This was the first direct reference Benjamin had made to Tommy's family history, and it sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. What exactly had Tommy told Benjamin about his father? And why did it sound like Tommy was using his own family's story as some kind of instructional manual. In early 1995, David began experiencing chest pains and unusual fatigue. The stress of watching Benjamin's transformation combined with increasingly demanding work at the foundry was taking a visible toll on his health. "Maybe I should see Dr. Patterson about these pains," David admitted one evening, rubbing his left arm absently. "David, we should go to the emergency room right now," I urged, alarmed by his pallor. "It's probably just muscle strain. I'll call the doctor Monday if it's not better." But David's condition was deteriorating faster than either of us realized. The combination of physical labor, emotional stress over Benjamin's behavior, and what I would later understand was guilt over events from his past, was creating a perfect storm of cardiac risk. During this same period, Tommy Kellner's influence over Benjamin reached a new level of intensity. I began overhearing conversations that went beyond misogynistic ideology into territory that sounded like preparation for actual violence. "The thing about women like your mother," Tommy explained during one session, "is that they never learn until they face real consequences. Words don't work with them. They're too used to manipulating their way out of accountability." "What kind of consequences?" Benjamin asked. "The kind that make them understand who really has power in the world. The kind that puts them back in their proper place." These conversations were becoming increasingly explicit, but they always stopped just short of detailing specific actions. It was as if Tommy was carefully building towards something without ever stating his ultimate intentions directly. I should have called the police then. I should have recorded these conversations and demanded an investigation into Tommy Kellner's background and intentions. But I was paralyzed by the horrible realization that my own son was being systematically prepared to commit violence against women, possibly including me. On April 14, 1995, David came home from work complaining of severe chest pains. His skin was gray, his hands were trembling, and he was struggling to breathe normally. "Margaret," he gasped, "something's really wrong. I think this might be my heart." I called 911 immediately. While waiting for the paramedics, David grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "If something happens to me," he whispered urgently, "you need to be careful around Tommy Kellner. There's something about that boy. Something I should have told you years ago." "What do you mean?" "His last name, Kellner. I think he might be related to Arthur Kellner, a man I had to report at the foundry years ago. If Tommy is Arthur's son..." The paramedics arrived before David could finish this thought, and he never regained consciousness. David died at 6:23 a.m. on April 15, 1995, taking his suspicions about Tommy Kellner with him to the grave. But his final words had planted a seed of understanding that would eventually help me piece together the true scope of the nightmare that was about to engulf our family. David's funeral was held on April 18th at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. 200 people came to honor his memory, co-workers, neighbors, relatives, who remembered his kindness and integrity. I sat between Emily and Benjamin in the front pew, trying to process the reality that David was gone forever. Throughout the service, I noticed Benjamin's strange behavior. Instead of grief, he seemed to be experiencing a kind of nervous excitement. He kept glancing toward the back of the church, as if waiting for something or someone. After the burial at Millbrook Cemetery, people gathered at our house for the traditional meal. Around 2 p.m., I felt overwhelmed by the crowd and needed a moment alone to process my grief. "I'll be right back," I told Emily. "I just need a few minutes to collect myself." I walked to our small bathroom at the back of the house, the only place where I could have complete privacy. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and finally allowed myself to cry the tears I'd been holding back. David was gone. How would I manage Benjamin's increasingly frightening behavior alone? How would I protect our family from whatever Tommy Kellner was planning? After several minutes, I heard urgent whispers in the hallway. "She's been in there 20 minutes. Everyone's busy with the meal. No one will notice if we disappear for a while." Benjamin's voice, but with an edge of cruel anticipation I'd never heard before. "You sure this is the right time?" Tommy Kellner's voice was unmistakable. "It's perfect timing. She's vulnerable, isolated, and no one will believe what happened anyway. Besides, she deserves this after what her husband did to my family." The words hit me like physical blows. Tommy Kellner was Arthur Kellner's son. This entire friendship, Benjamin's corruption, the systematic poisoning of my son's mind, it had all been planned from the beginning as an elaborate revenge against David and our family. Before I could react, the bathroom door exploded inward. The lock snapped as Benjamin burst in, followed by Tommy and 3 other boys, whose faces I recognized from the group that had been systematically destroying my son's soul. "Benjamin, what are you doing?" I whispered, my mouth dry with terror. My son looked at me with eyes filled with hatred so pure it seemed to burn. "It's time you paid for what your husband did to Tommy's family," he said with eerie calm. "What are you talking about? What did David do?" Tommy stepped forward with a smile of pure malice. "Your precious husband destroyed my father's career, Margaret. Got him fired from the foundry for safety violations that were just excuses to get rid of a good man. My dad lost everything because of David Thompson's self-righteous meddling. David was trying to save lives. David was trying to make himself look important by destroying other people." Tommy snarled. "Well, now it's payback time. Your husband took everything from my family, so I'm going to take everything from his." The realization hit me with devastating force. This wasn't random violence or teenage rebellion corrupted by misogynistic ideology. This was the culmination of a multi-year revenge plot with my son as the primary weapon and my violation as the ultimate goal. What happened next was the complete destruction of everything I had believed about family safety and human nature. Benjamin, under Tommy's guidance and encouragement, subjected me to violence that was both physically devastating and psychologically annihilating. But now I understood the true horror. This wasn't just sexual assault. It was the final move in a chess game that Tommy Kellner had been playing for years. He had systematically corrupted my son, turned Benjamin into a weapon, and orchestrated this moment as the perfect revenge against David Thompson's family. "This is what your husband's righteousness cost," Tommy whispered as Benjamin assaulted me. "He thought he was so moral, reporting my father destroying our lives. Well, now his precious family knows what real consequences feel like." Throughout the attack, Tommy provided a running commentary that revealed the full scope of his planning. "I've been watching your family for 2 years, Margaret. Learning your routines, your weaknesses, your son's vulnerabilities. Benjamin was so easy to corrupt, just a lonely, sensitive boy desperate for approval. All I had to do was give him someone to blame for his problems, and he ate up everything I taught him." The assault lasted nearly an hour, with Tommy orchestrating every moment, while Benjamin acted as his primary instrument of revenge. When it ended, Tommy looked down at me with satisfied contempt. "Your husband thought he could destroy my family without consequences," he said. "But the Kellner family has a long memory. We wait, we plan, and we always collect our debts. Consider this payment in full." They left me bleeding on the bathroom floor, while 200 mourners continued eating funeral food 20 feet away, completely unaware of the horror that had just occurred in their midst. The hours following the assault passed in a haze of shock and disbelief. I somehow managed to clean myself up, return to the gathering, and play the role of grieving widow, while Tommy Kellner's words echoed in my mind. "We always collect our debts." This hadn't been random violence. It had been the carefully planned conclusion of a revenge plot that began years before Benjamin was even born. My son hadn't fallen under bad influences. He had been systematically groomed by someone who viewed his corruption as justice for past wrongs. That night, I made the agonizing decision to leave. I couldn't remain in the same house with Benjamin, knowing that he was both my son and the weapon someone else had used to destroy me. I also couldn't report what had happened. How do you explain that your own son sexually assaulted you as part of someone else's revenge plot? Who would believe such an impossibly twisted story? I packed a single suitcase and took a Greyhound bus to Columbus, leaving letters for Emily and Benjamin that contained only the barest explanations for my sudden departure. Emily found me at a women's shelter in Columbus 2 weeks after I disappeared. She was devastated by my condition, but couldn't understand why I'd fled so abruptly. I couldn't tell her the full truth about her brother, so I claimed I couldn't bear remaining in the house where David and I had been so happy. Over the following months, Emily shared disturbing updates about Benjamin's behavior. He had dropped out of school, was openly using drugs, and was associating with increasingly dangerous criminals. The house David had been so proud of was deteriorating from neglect and misuse. But I was haunted by Tommy Kellner's revelations about David and Arthur Kellner. I needed to understand the full truth about what had happened at the foundry and why Tommy had considered my family's destruction appropriate revenge. In 1997, I secretly returned to Millbrook and began investigating. I tracked down several of David's former co-workers and gradually pieced together the complete story of Arthur Kellner's firing and its aftermath. What I learned was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Arthur Kellner had indeed been falsifying safety inspections, and his negligence had created conditions that could have killed multiple workers. David's report had saved lives and prevented a catastrophic industrial accident. But Arthur had blamed David for his own misconduct, and that blame had festered into an obsession with revenge. After losing his job, Arthur had descended into alcoholism and violence. His wife had fled with young Tommy after Arthur began beating them both. They had lived in poverty while Arthur drank himself to death, all the while blaming David Thompson for their suffering, rather than accepting responsibility for his own actions. Tommy Kellner had grown up listening to his father's bitter stories about the self-righteous bastard who had destroyed their family. When Arthur died of liver failure in 1988, Tommy had inherited not just grief, but a mission of revenge against the Thompson family. The investigation revealed that Tommy had been planning his infiltration of our family for years. He had deliberately failed grades to remain in school long enough to encounter Benjamin. He had studied our family's routines, identified Benjamin's vulnerabilities, and crafted his approach with methodical precision. Tommy Kellner hadn't simply corrupted my son, he had weaponized him as part of a multi-generational vendetta that consumed 2 families and destroyed countless lives. In September 1998, Benjamin was arrested for the armed robbery and sexual assault of a 19-year-old store clerk. During the investigation, police discovered Tommy Kellner's central role in orchestrating not just this crime, but Benjamin's entire transformation from sensitive child to violent criminal. Tommy was arrested as an accessory and charged with conspiracy drug dealing and multiple counts of corrupting a minor. During his interrogation, he showed no remorse for destroying Benjamin's life or orchestrating my assault. In fact, he seemed proud of his accomplishments. The Thompson family owed a debt, Tommy told investigators. My father was a good man who got destroyed by David Thompson's self-righteousness. Everything that happened to that family was justice, long overdue, but justice nonetheless. The full scope of Tommy's manipulation came to light during the trial. He had spent 4 years systematically corrupting Benjamin, introducing him to drugs, indoctrinating him with misogynistic ideology, and gradually preparing him to commit increasingly serious crimes. The assault on me had been Tommy's masterpiece, the ultimate revenge against David Thompson's legacy. Benjamin was sentenced to 8 to 15 years in prison. Tommy received a longer sentence due to his role as the mastermind and his extensive criminal history. But no legal punishment could undo the damage they had inflicted on our family. With both Benjamin and Tommy imprisoned, I was finally free to focus on healing. I enrolled in business classes, found meaningful work as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization, and gradually built a new life that had nothing to do with my identity as wife or mother. The investigation into Tommy Kellner's background had revealed the full tragedy of what hatred can accomplish across generations. Arthur Kellner's refusal to accept responsibility for his own misconduct had poisoned his son with a need for revenge that ultimately destroyed multiple families, including his own. Tommy's corruption of Benjamin hadn't been random teenage rebellion. It had been a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare designed to turn my son into a weapon against his own family. Understanding this didn't excuse Benjamin's actions, but it helped me comprehend the full scope of the evil we had encountered. In 2001, Emily married James Patterson, a social worker, who treated me with gentle respect and never pressed for details about my family's traumatic history. Their wedding was small and beautiful, reminding me that love and commitment could still exist in the world despite all the hatred I had witnessed. When Emily and James's first child was born in 2003, a daughter they named Sarah Rose, I discovered that becoming a grandmother offered unexpected healing. These children represented possibility, hope, the continuation of our family line through love rather than violence. Sarah was followed by twin boys, Michael and Matthew, born in 2005. Suddenly, my apartment was filled with the chaotic joy of grandchildren who knew me simply as Grandma Maggie, someone who could be trusted completely, who would never let harm come to them. I never told my grandchildren about Benjamin or Tommy Kellner. Some truths are too dark for young hearts to bear, and these children deserve to grow up believing in safety, kindness, and the fundamental goodness of family relationships. In March 2007, I received a letter from Benjamin in prison. After 9 years of incarceration, he had finally begun to understand the full scope of Tommy Kellner's manipulation and the role he had played in destroying our family. The letter was written in handwriting I barely recognized, smaller and more careful than his teenage scrawl. Dear Mom, I know I have no right to contact you after what I did. I've spent years trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could hurt you so terribly, and I think I finally understand the truth about Tommy and what he did to our family. I learned recently that Tommy's real name is Thomas Arthur Kellner, Jr. He was named after his father, the man Dad had to report at the foundry. Everything Tommy told me about women, about you, about Dad, it was all lies designed to turn me into a weapon against our family. I know now that Dad saved lives by reporting Arthur Kellner's safety violations. I know you were a good mother who loved me even when I didn't deserve it. I know I let myself be turned into something monstrous by a man who used my pain and confusion to serve his own twisted need for revenge. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how completely I was manipulated and how sorry I am for the role I played in destroying everything good in our family. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I hope you've found peace somewhere away from the nightmare I helped create. Your son, Benjamin. I read the letter multiple times looking for signs of manipulation, but found only what seemed like genuine understanding and remorse. It didn't heal the wound Benjamin had inflicted, nothing could do that, but it confirmed that my son had finally recognized the full scope of Tommy Kellner's evil. Benjamin died in prison on February 14, 2009, stabbed while trying to protect a younger inmate from assault. The chaplain who called Emily said Benjamin had been defending someone weaker when he was attacked by another prisoner. He died trying to do the right thing, Chaplain Morrison explained. In his final moments, he chose to protect rather than harm. I thought that might bring some comfort. Emily delivered this news gently while my grandchildren played nearby. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, sadness for the boy Benjamin had once been, relief that his story had finally ended, and something approaching peace, knowing that he had chosen courage over cowardice in his final act. We held a memorial service at Millbrook Cemetery where David was buried. Standing beside my husband's grave, looking at the fresh earth where my son was interred, I felt the last chapter of this tragedy finally closing. Tommy Kellner had died in prison 2 years earlier, stabbed by inmates who discovered his history of crimes against children. His death had passed unnoticed, except by prison officials and a few remaining relatives who had long since disowned him. The Kellner family's vendetta against the Thompsons was finally finished, not through forgiveness or reconciliation, but through the simple fact that hatred had consumed everyone it touched, leaving nothing behind but graves and memories. I'm 71 now, and my grandchildren are growing into thoughtful, compassionate young people who represent everything good about human potential. Sarah is 18, preparing to study elementary education. The twins, Michael and Matthew, are 16 Benjamin's age when he made his terrible choices, but they are surrounded by love, guidance, and protection from the kind of toxic influences that destroyed their uncle. Through 28 years of recovery, I've learned truths that I wish I had understood when my children were young. Evil is often patient and methodical. Tommy Kellner spent years planning his revenge, carefully studying our family's vulnerabilities and crafting his approach with meticulous precision. The enemy in your child's life might not be obviously dangerous, they might appear helpful, charming, even beneficial until their true intentions are revealed. Hatred is inherited more easily than wisdom. Arthur Kellner passed his bitterness and need for revenge to his son like a family heirloom. Tommy grew up believing that destroying the Thompson family was not just appropriate, but necessary to honor his father's memory. Breaking cycles of hatred requires conscious effort and the courage to reject the poisonous legacies previous generations try to pass down. Vulnerability creates opportunity for corruption. Benjamin's isolation after Emily left for college, combined with his sensitive nature and need for belonging, made him the perfect target for Tommy's manipulation. Parents must pay attention not just to who their children spend time with, but why they're drawn to particular influences and what emotional needs those influences are meeting. Truth is the only antidote to systematic deception. If I had known the full truth about Arthur Kellner's history and Tommy's real identity, I could have protected Benjamin from corruption. But David's guilt over his role in Arthur's downfall, combined with our assumption that the past was truly past, created blind spots that Tommy exploited perfectly. Sarah, Michael, Matthew, my beloved grandchildren. If you're reading this someday, I want you to understand why I'm finally telling this complete truth. Your family's history includes both great love and terrible tragedy, both heroic choices and devastating failures. Your grandfather David was a good man who saved lives by reporting dangerous safety violations, but his actions also set in motion a chain of events that ultimately destroyed our family. This doesn't make his choice wrong, it makes it tragically complicated, as many moral choices are in the real world. Your uncle Benjamin wasn't born evil, but he allowed himself to be corrupted by someone who used his pain and confusion as weapons against his own family. This doesn't excuse his actions, but it explains how good people can be turned into instruments of evil when they're isolated, vulnerable, and desperately seeking belonging. The most important lesson from our family's tragedy is this: hatred is a choice that destroys everyone it touches, including those who choose to embrace it. Tommy Kellner could have chosen to break the cycle of bitterness his father created. He could have sought understanding, forgiveness, even justice through legitimate means. Instead, he chose revenge, and that choice poisoned 2 generations and destroyed multiple families. You have the power to ensure that this cycle of destruction ends with your generation. Choose love over hatred, understanding over revenge, healing over retribution. When someone tries to convince you that entire groups of people are your enemies, recognize this as the same poison that destroyed your uncle. When you encounter injustice, seek solutions that build rather than destroy, that heal rather than harm. Most importantly, remember that family is both blood and choice. The people who truly love you are those who want you to become your best self, not those who encourage your worst impulses. Trust those who challenge you to grow in positive directions, and be suspicious of those who offer simple explanations for complex problems or easy targets for difficult emotions. As I finish writing this memoir, I'm struck by how much pain could have been prevented if Arthur Kellner had chosen differently after losing his job. If he had accepted responsibility for his safety violations, sought help for his drinking, focused on rebuilding rather than revenge, his son might have grown up to be a productive member of society instead of an architect of destruction. But Arthur chose bitterness, and that choice echoed through generations, ultimately claiming the lives and souls of people who had nothing to do with the original conflict. This is the true cost of inherited hatred. It spreads like a disease, infecting everyone it touches, creating new victims and new cycles of pain. Yet there is hope in this story despite its darkness. Emily chose love over bitterness, building a family based on kindness and mutual support, rather than revenge and manipulation. My grandchildren are growing up surrounded by people who model healthy relationships, who teach them to resolve conflicts through communication rather than violence, who show them that strength comes from protecting others rather than dominating them. The Thompson family line will continue through love rather than hatred, through healing rather than harm. Tommy Kellner's ultimate failure was not just that his revenge succeeded temporarily, but that it failed to destroy the capacity for good that still existed in our family's survivors. If you're reading this as a parent, pay attention to the people who influence your children. Don't assume that danger always looks dangerous. Tommy Kellner was charming, intelligent, and seemingly helpful until his true nature was revealed. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong about your child's friendships, even if you can't articulate exactly what troubles you. If you're reading this as someone who has been hurt by others, remember that revenge creates more victims without healing the original wound. The path to peace lies not in making others suffer as you have suffered, but in choosing to break the cycle of pain rather than perpetuate it. And if you're reading this as someone struggling with hatred, anger, or the desire for revenge, please understand that these emotions will ultimately destroy you, along with your intended targets. Tommy Kellner spent his entire adult life planning and executing revenge against my family, and in the end, he died alone in prison, having accomplished nothing except the creation of more pain in the world. There is always another choice. There is always a path toward healing rather than harm. There is always the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest circumstances. My name is Margaret Rose Thompson. I survived a multi-generational vendetta that used my own son as a weapon against me. I rebuilt my life from complete devastation. I raised grandchildren who know they are safe, loved, and protected from the kind of evil that once consumed their uncle. This is my complete truth, and I'm no longer afraid to tell it. May it serve as both warning and hope for anyone who encounters similar darkness in their own life. The chain of hatred ends here. Love, imperfect but persistent, will have the final word. If you or someone you know needs help escaping family violence or extremist influences, resources are available. Contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or organizations like Life After Hate, www.lifeafterhate.org. Help exists, healing is possible, and you are not alone.